Captain Sarah Chen had always known she would face challenges as one of the few women in the Marine Corps, but nothing could have prepared her for the humiliation she experienced that Tuesday morning in the mess hall at Camp Pendleton. The incident that would change everything began like any other day, with the California sun casting long shadows across the base as Marines prepared for their morning routines. Sarah had enlisted in the Marines 12 years earlier, driven by a deep sense of patriotism and a desire to prove that women could serve with the same dedication and courage as their male counterparts. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she had been raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8 years old. Her grandmother, a stern but loving woman who had worked as a nurse during the Korean War, instilled in Sarah the values of service, honor, and perseverance. Throughout her military career, Sarah had consistently excelled. She graduated at the top of her class from Officer Candidate School, earned multiple commendations for her leadership during deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, and had recently been selected for a prestigious assignment at the Pentagon. Her record was spotless, her dedication unwavering, and her respect among her peers well established. However, not everyone appreciated having a woman in positions of authority. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had been in the Marines for 15 years, and his old-school mentality made it difficult for him to accept the changing dynamics of the military. He had served multiple tours in combat zones, and prided himself on being a tough, no-nonsense Marine who demanded respect through intimidation. Rodriguez had been watching Sarah for weeks, looking for any opportunity to challenge her authority or undermine her position. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton was always busy during breakfast hours, filled with Marines grabbing quick meals before heading to their various duties. The large facility could accommodate hundreds of service members at once, with long tables arranged in neat rows and serving lines that moved with military efficiency. The atmosphere was typically one of camaraderie and professional interaction, but underlying tensions sometimes surfaced when different personalities and philosophies clashed. That morning, Sarah had arrived at the mess hall slightly later than usual, having spent extra time reviewing reports for an important briefing she was scheduled to give later in the day. She was dressed in her crisp utility uniform, her posture straight and confident as she walked through the entrance. The familiar sounds of conversation, clinking dishes, and the occasional burst of laughter filled the air as Marines went about their breakfast routine. Rodriguez had been watching the entrance, waiting for his moment. He had been discussing with his fellow NCOs about what he perceived as the declining standards of the Marine Corps, particularly regarding the integration of women into combat roles and leadership positions. His resentment had been building for months, fueled by his belief that women were weakening the institution he had devoted his life to serving. As Sarah approached the serving line, balancing her tray and navigating through the crowded space, Rodriguez deliberately positioned himself in her path. The collision was intentional and forceful, causing Sarah to stumble and nearly drop her tray. The impact was hard enough to cause several Marines nearby to look up from their conversations, sensing that something was amiss. "Watch where you're going," Rodriguez said loudly, his voice carrying across the immediate area. His tone was aggressive and disrespectful, clearly intended to embarrass Sarah in front of her subordinates and peers. Several Marines stopped their conversations, uncertain about how to react to the obvious confrontation developing before them. Sarah quickly regained her composure, her training and experience helping her maintain her professional demeanor despite the obvious provocation. She looked directly at Rodriguez, recognizing the challenge in his eyes and understanding that this was more than just an accidental bump in a crowded mess hall. The tension in the air was palpable as other Marines began to take notice of the confrontation. "Excuse me, Staff Sergeant," Sarah replied calmly, her voice steady and controlled. She had learned early in her career that responding to aggression with aggression rarely produced positive results, especially when dealing with subordinates who were testing boundaries. Her years of leadership experience had taught her the importance of maintaining dignity and professionalism even in challenging situations. Rodriguez wasn't finished. He had been planning this confrontation for weeks, and he wasn't about to let it end with a simple exchange of words. He took a step closer to Sarah, his body language clearly aggressive and intimidating. His voice grew louder, ensuring that more Marines in the vicinity could hear his next words. "Maybe you should stick to desk jobs instead of trying to play soldier with the real Marines," Rodriguez said, his words dripping with contempt and disrespect. The comment was clearly intended to undermine Sarah's authority and question her competence as a Marine officer. Several Marines shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the inappropriate nature of Rodriguez's behavior but uncertain about how to intervene. The mess hall had grown noticeably quieter as more Marines became aware of the confrontation. Some looked on with disapproval at Rodriguez's behavior, while others seemed uncertain about how to respond. The unwritten codes of military hierarchy and respect were being violated, and everyone present could sense the gravity of the situation developing before them. Sarah felt a surge of anger rise within her, but her professional training and personal discipline kept her emotions in check. She had faced similar challenges throughout her career, and she had learned that the best response was often patience and professionalism. She understood that Rodriguez was trying to provoke her into an emotional reaction that would undermine her authority and potentially damage her reputation. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice remaining calm but taking on a more authoritative tone. "I suggest you remember who you're speaking to and adjust your attitude accordingly." Her words were measured and professional, but they carried the weight of her rank and authority. She was giving Rodriguez an opportunity to back down and avoid further escalation of the situation. Instead of backing down, Rodriguez escalated his aggressive behavior. He moved even closer to Sarah, violating her personal space and creating a physically intimidating presence. His next action would cross a line that could not be uncrossed, transforming what had been a verbal confrontation into something far more serious. "I don't take orders from women," Rodriguez said, and then he placed his hands on Sarah's shoulders and shoved her backward with considerable force. The push was hard enough to cause Sarah to stumble several steps backward, nearly causing her to fall. The aggressive physical contact was witnessed by dozens of Marines, and the mess hall fell into stunned silence. The shove was not just a physical assault. It was a direct challenge to military authority and discipline. Rodriguez had crossed the line from insubordination to assault on a superior officer, a serious offense that could result in court-martial and imprisonment. The other Marines in the mess hall understood the gravity of what they had just witnessed, and many looked on in shock and disbelief. Sarah managed to maintain her balance and composure, despite the shock and humiliation of being physically assaulted in front of her fellow Marines. Her face remained stoic, but inside she was processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. She knew that this incident would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Rodriguez but potentially for her own career and reputation. The silence in the mess hall was deafening. Marines who had been engaged in casual conversation moments before were now frozen in place, uncertain about how to respond to what they had just witnessed. Some looked angry on Sarah's behalf, while others seemed shocked by the brazenness of Rodriguez's actions. The normal rhythm of military life had been shattered by this moment of violence and insubordination. Sarah took a deep breath and straightened her uniform, her movements deliberate and controlled. She knew that her response to this situation would be closely watched and remembered by everyone present. Her reaction would either reinforce her authority and professionalism or potentially undermine her position as a leader. The weight of the moment was not lost on her as she prepared to address the situation. What happened next would change everything. As Sarah prepared to respond to Rodriguez's assault, the atmosphere in the mess hall suddenly shifted. The sound of approaching footsteps could be heard from the entrance, and several Marines near the door began to straighten their postures and look in that direction with obvious surprise and concern. 4 figures had entered the mess hall, their presence immediately commanding attention and respect from everyone present. The morning that had begun with routine military activities and had descended into confrontation and assault was about to take a turn that no one could have anticipated. The 4 men who entered the mess hall carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of senior military leadership. Their uniforms were impeccable, their posture commanding, and their presence immediately transformed the atmosphere in the room. These were not ordinary visitors to Camp Pendleton. They were among the highest-ranking officers in the United States Marine Corps, and their unexpected appearance sent ripples of tension and anticipation throughout the facility. General William Harrison, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, led the group. At 62 years old, he was a distinguished veteran of multiple conflicts and a leader known for his unwavering commitment to Marine Corps values and traditions. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, and his chest displayed an impressive array of ribbons and decorations earned through decades of dedicated service. Behind him walked General Patricia Williams, the Assistant Commandant, a groundbreaking officer who had shattered numerous glass ceilings throughout her career. Accompanying them were General Robert Kim, the Commanding General of Marine Corps Combat Development Command, and General Michael Thompson, the Commanding General of Marine Corps Installations Command. Together, these four officers represented the pinnacle of Marine Corps leadership, and their simultaneous presence at Camp Pendleton was both unusual and significant. The reason for their visit was related to a comprehensive review of gender integration policies and programs throughout the Marine Corps. They had been conducting unannounced inspections and assessments at various installations, evaluating the progress and challenges of implementing new policies designed to create a more inclusive and effective fighting force. Their visit to Camp Pendleton was part of this larger initiative, and they had specifically requested to observe normal daily operations without prior notification to base personnel. As the four generals entered the mess hall, the Marines present began to recognize the significance of their visitors. The normal sounds of conversation and dining utensils gradually diminished as more service members became aware of the distinguished presence in their midst. The timing of their arrival, coinciding with the confrontation between Sarah and Rodriguez, would prove to be more than just coincidental. General Harrison's experienced eyes immediately assessed the situation in the mess hall. With decades of leadership experience, he could sense tension and conflict even in subtle situations. The body language of the Marines present, the unusual silence, and the obvious focal point of attention near the serving line all indicated that something significant had just occurred. Sarah stood near the serving line, her posture straight despite the shock of what had just transpired. Her uniform remained crisp and professional, but her face showed the strain of maintaining composure in the aftermath of Rodriguez's assault. She had not yet noticed the arrival of the senior leadership, focused as she was on managing the immediate situation with Rodriguez and the dozens of Marines who had witnessed the incident. Rodriguez, still standing aggressively close to Sarah, was equally unaware of the change in the room's dynamics. His attention was focused entirely on his confrontation with Sarah, and his body language continued to project hostility and insubordination. He had crossed a line from which there would be no return, but he had not yet realized the full implications of his actions. General Williams was the first to fully comprehend what was happening. As one of the few women to achieve such high rank in the Marine Corps, she had experienced her own share of challenges and confrontations throughout her career. Her trained eye immediately recognized the signs of a gender-based conflict, and her instincts told her that intervention was necessary. "General," she said quietly to Harrison, nodding in the direction of the confrontation. Her voice was barely audible, but her concern was evident. The other generals followed her gaze and immediately understood the situation developing before them. The four generals began moving toward the confrontation, their approach deliberate and purposeful. Marines throughout the mess hall began to notice their movement and started standing at attention, recognizing the seriousness of the moment. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the senior leadership closed the distance to the site of the incident. Sarah finally became aware of the approaching generals when she noticed Marines around her beginning to stand and assume positions of attention. She turned slightly and felt her heart skip a beat as she recognized the stars on the uniforms of the approaching officers. The presence of such high-ranking leadership in the aftermath of her confrontation with Rodriguez added a new dimension of complexity to an already difficult situation. Rodriguez remained oblivious to the changing dynamics until he heard the sound of multiple Marines around him coming to attention. His peripheral vision caught the movement of service members straightening their postures and facing in his direction. When he turned to see what was causing the reaction, his face immediately showed the shock and fear of recognizing his catastrophic error in judgment. The four generals stopped approximately 10 feet from Sarah and Rodriguez, their formation deliberate and impressive. General Harrison stood slightly forward, with the other three generals flanking him in a display of unified leadership. Their collective presence created an atmosphere of authority and judgment that could not be ignored or dismissed. The entire mess hall had now fallen into complete silence. Every Marine present understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary and potentially career-defining for everyone involved. The normal routines of military life had been suspended in favor of this moment of high-stakes leadership and accountability. General Harrison's eyes moved from Sarah to Rodriguez, taking in the body language and positioning of both Marines. His experienced assessment quickly identified who was the aggressor and who was the victim in the situation. The evidence was clear from the postures, expressions, and spatial relationships between the two service members. Sarah, recognizing the protocol required in the presence of such senior leadership, began to move into a position of attention. Her military bearing remained exemplary despite the stress and humiliation she had just endured. Her response demonstrated the professionalism and discipline that had characterized her entire career. Rodriguez was struggling to process the magnitude of his situation. The presence of 4 generals, including the commandant of the Marine Corps, in the immediate aftermath of his assault on a superior officer was beyond his worst nightmare. His aggressive posture began to deflate as the reality of his circumstances became clear. What happened next would be remembered by every Marine present for the rest of their careers. Instead of addressing Rodriguez first, or demanding an explanation of what had transpired, General Harrison turned directly toward Sarah. His movement was deliberate and respectful, and his intention was immediately clear to everyone watching. General Harrison raised his right hand in a crisp, perfect salute directed specifically at Sarah. The gesture was not just a recognition of her rank, but a demonstration of respect for her as a fellow Marine and leader. The symbolism of the most senior Marine in the Corps saluting her in this moment was profound and unmistakable. Following General Harrison's lead, General Williams, General Kim, and General Thompson simultaneously raised their hands in salute to Sarah. The 4 most powerful leaders in the Marine Corps were united in their gesture of respect and support, creating a moment that would resonate throughout the military community for years to come. Sarah, fighting back tears of relief and gratitude, returned the salute with precision and dignity. Her response was exemplary, demonstrating the same professionalism and bearing that had characterized her throughout the confrontation with Rodriguez. The exchange of salutes between Sarah and the 4 generals was witnessed by every Marine in the mess hall, creating a moment of profound significance. The symbolism of the moment was not lost on anyone present. In saluting Sarah first, before addressing the obvious disciplinary issues at hand, the senior leadership was making a clear statement about the Marine Corps' commitment to treating all Marines with dignity and respect, regardless of gender. They were demonstrating that assault and insubordination would not be tolerated, and that professional, competent Marines would be supported regardless of the challenges they faced. Rodriguez stood frozen in place, his face pale with the recognition of his catastrophic error in judgment. The sight of 4 generals saluting the woman he had just assaulted drove home the magnitude of his actions in a way that no amount of counseling or training could have achieved. His career in the Marine Corps was effectively over, and everyone present understood this reality. The mess hall remained in absolute silence as the salute exchange concluded. The 4 generals maintained their professional bearing, but their message had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. They had witnessed enough of the situation to understand what had transpired, and their initial response demonstrated their priorities and values. General Harrison lowered his salute and stepped forward slightly, his attention now focusing on Rodriguez. The staff sergeant's fate was sealed, but the process of accountability and justice was just beginning. The presence of the senior leadership ensured that this incident would be handled with the seriousness and attention it deserved. General Harrison's voice cut through the silence of the mess hall like a blade, carrying the authority and gravity befitting the highest-ranking Marine in the Corps. His words were measured, deliberate, and designed to leave no doubt about the seriousness of what he had witnessed and what would follow. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," General Harrison said, his tone formal and commanding. "You will report to the base commander's office immediately. Master Sergeant Johnson," he called to a nearby NCO, "you will escort Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and ensure he remains available for questioning." The orders were crisp and non-negotiable, delivered with the precision that had made Harrison one of the most respected leaders in the military. Rodriguez's face had drained of all color as the full weight of his situation became clear. Standing before the 4 most senior Marines in the Corps, having just been caught red-handed assaulting a superior officer, he understood that his career was not just in jeopardy, it was effectively over. His hands trembled slightly as he attempted to maintain some semblance of military bearing, but his confidence had completely evaporated. "Sir, I can explain," Rodriguez began, his voice cracking under the pressure of the moment. His attempt to speak was immediately cut off by General Williams, whose own experience with discrimination and harassment had given her a particular sensitivity to such situations. "There will be time for explanations during the formal investigation," General Williams said firmly.
"Right now you need to report as ordered and await further instructions." Her voice carried the authority of her rank, but also a hint of personal disappointment in seeing such behavior from a Marine NCO.
Master Sergeant Johnson, a veteran with 22 years of service, immediately stepped forward to comply with the general's order. His face showed a mixture of professionalism and disgust as he approached Rodriguez. Johnson had served with distinction in multiple combat deployments and had earned the respect of his peers through his dedication to Marine Corps values. Witnessing such a blatant violation of those values by a fellow NCO was personally offensive to him. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you're with me," Johnson said firmly. "Move out." The escort was not a request, but an order, and Rodriguez had no choice but to comply. His walk toward the mess hall exit was a march of shame witnessed by hundreds of Marines, many of whom had looked up to him as a leader and role model. His reputation and legacy were being destroyed with each step. As Rodriguez was led away, General Harrison turned his attention back to Sarah. His expression softened slightly, showing the concern and support that the situation demanded. Despite his position as the senior-most Marine, Harrison understood the importance of addressing the human element of what had just occurred. "Captain Chen," General Harrison said, his voice taking on a more personal tone while maintaining appropriate military formality. "Are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" His questions demonstrated genuine concern for Sarah's well-being and established that her safety and health were the immediate priorities. Sarah straightened her posture and responded with the professionalism that had characterized her throughout the ordeal. "No, sir, I'm not injured. Thank you for your concern." Her voice was steady, but those close enough to observe could see the emotional impact of the situation in her eyes. The combination of the assault, the humiliation, and the unexpected support from the senior leadership had created a complex mix of emotions. General Kim stepped forward, his own expression showing both anger at Rodriguez's behavior and admiration for Sarah's composure. As a senior officer responsible for combat development, Kim understood the critical importance of maintaining discipline and respect within the Marine Corps. The incident he had just witnessed represented everything that could undermine unit cohesion and effectiveness. "Captain, your bearing and professionalism throughout this incident have been exemplary," General Kim said. "The way you maintained your composure under such inappropriate treatment reflects the best traditions of our Corps." His words were intended not just to support Sarah, but also to demonstrate to the watching Marines what proper leadership looked like under pressure. The mess hall remained at attention, with Marines standing silently as they observed this unprecedented display of senior leadership intervention. Many of the younger Marines had never seen generals in person, let alone witnessed them personally intervening in a disciplinary situation. The lesson being taught was clear. Regardless of rank or position, assault and disrespect would not be tolerated in the Marine Corps. General Thompson, who had been observing the reactions of the Marines throughout the mess hall, stepped forward to address the broader implications of what had occurred. As the commanding general responsible for installations, he understood that this incident would have ripple effects throughout the base, and potentially throughout the entire Marine Corps. "Marines," General Thompson said, his voice carrying to every corner of the mess hall. "What you have witnessed here today is unacceptable behavior that violates everything we stand for as Marines. Every Marine, regardless of gender, race, or background, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. That's not a suggestion. It's an order." His words were met with silent attention, but the message was clearly received by everyone present. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude and validation as she listened to the general's words of support. Throughout her career, she had often felt isolated and alone when facing discrimination and harassment. Having the most senior leadership in the Marine Corps publicly support her was both emotionally overwhelming and professionally validating. General Williams approached Sarah directly, her own experience as a woman in the military, giving her unique insight into what Sarah was experiencing. "Captain Chen, I know this has been a difficult and humiliating experience. I want you to know that this behavior does not represent the values or standards of our Corps. You have our full support, and we will ensure that this matter is handled appropriately." The support from General Williams was particularly meaningful to Sarah. Seeing another woman who had achieved the highest levels of military leadership provided both inspiration and validation. It demonstrated that success was possible despite the challenges and obstacles that women in the military often faced. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, had been summoned when word of the general's presence reached his office. He arrived in the mess hall to find the situation already under control, but his face showed the concern and embarrassment of having such an incident occur on his installation. His reputation and the reputation of his command were now at stake. "General Harrison, sir," Colonel Martinez said as he approached and saluted. "I apologize for this incident occurring on my base. I take full responsibility for the failure in leadership and discipline that allowed this situation to develop." His words were formal and professional, but his obvious distress was evident to everyone present. General Harrison returned the salute and acknowledged the base commander's presence. "Colonel Martinez, we'll need to conduct a thorough investigation of this incident and review the policies and procedures that may have contributed to this situation. I'll expect a complete report within 72 hours. The timeline was aggressive, but the seriousness of the situation demanded immediate action. The investigation would need to examine not just Rodriguez's individual actions, but also the broader culture and environment that had allowed such behavior to develop. Questions would be raised about supervision, training, and the effectiveness of existing policies designed to prevent discrimination and harassment." General Harrison turned back to Sarah, his expression showing both respect and concern. "Captain Chen, you'll be contacted by investigators who will need a detailed statement about what occurred here today. I want to assure you that this investigation will be thorough and fair, and that any retaliation against you for reporting this incident will be dealt with severely." The promise of protection against retaliation was important, as many service members who reported harassment or assault often faced additional challenges from their peers and superiors. The public nature of the incident and the involvement of the senior leadership provided some protection, but the potential for backlash remained a concern. As the immediate crisis was being managed, word of the incident was already beginning to spread throughout the base. The presence of 4 generals in the mess hall, combined with the dramatic events that had unfolded, ensured that the story would be discussed in barracks, offices, and training facilities throughout Camp Pendleton within hours. The broader implications of the incident were significant. It would likely become a case study in military leadership courses, a reference point for discussions about gender integration, and a symbol of the ongoing challenges facing the military as it worked to create a more inclusive and professional environment. For the Marines who had witnessed the events firsthand, the lessons were clear and immediate. They had seen that inappropriate behavior would be met with swift and severe consequences, regardless of rank or position. They had also seen that professional conduct and dignity under pressure were valued and recognized at the highest levels of leadership. The 4 generals concluded their immediate intervention and prepared to continue their broader mission on the base. However, the impact of their presence and actions would extend far beyond this single incident, influencing policies, procedures, and attitudes throughout the Marine Corps for years to come. The investigation that followed the mess hall incident was swift, thorough, and unprecedented in its scope. Within hours of the confrontation, a team of investigators from the Inspector General's office had arrived at Camp Pendleton to begin collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses. The involvement of the Commandant of the Marine Corps and 3 other generals ensured that this case would receive the highest priority and most meticulous attention. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found himself confined to quarters pending the outcome of the investigation. The charges against him were serious and numerous: assault on a superior officer, conduct unbecoming a Marine, failure to obey orders, and violation of the military's equal opportunity policies. Each charge carried significant penalties, and the combination virtually guaranteed that his career in the Marine Corps was over. The investigation revealed that Rodriguez's behavior was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of discrimination and harassment that had been developing over several months. Interviews with other female Marines at Camp Pendleton uncovered additional instances of inappropriate comments, exclusion from training opportunities, and subtle forms of retaliation. The scope of the problem was larger than anyone had initially realized. Captain Sarah Chen cooperated fully with the investigation, providing detailed statements about not only the mess hall incident, but also the series of smaller confrontations and challenges she had faced from Rodriguez and some of his associates. Her testimony was clear, professional, and consistent, demonstrating the same integrity and honesty that had characterized her entire military career. The investigation also examined the broader cultural and leadership factors that had allowed such behavior to persist. Questions were raised about the effectiveness of existing training programs, the responsiveness of the chain of command to complaints, and the adequacy of policies designed to prevent discrimination and harassment. The findings would have implications far beyond the immediate case. General Harrison personally reviewed the investigation findings and was deeply troubled by what he discovered. The incident in the mess hall was just the visible manifestation of a deeper problem that threatened the very foundations of Marine Corps values and effectiveness. He understood that decisive action was required, not just to address this specific case, but to send a clear message throughout the entire Corps. The court-martial proceedings for Rodriguez began 3 weeks after the incident. The case drew significant attention from military justice experts, women's advocacy groups, and media outlets that covered military affairs. The presence of multiple general officers as witnesses in the case was unprecedented and underscored the seriousness with which the Marine Corps was treating the matter. During the court-martial, the prosecution presented a compelling case that included testimony from dozens of witnesses, video surveillance from the mess hall, and evidence of Rodriguez's pattern of discriminatory behavior. The defense attempted to portray Rodriguez as a dedicated Marine whose judgment had been temporarily clouded by stress and deployment-related issues, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Sarah testified with the same professionalism and dignity that she had displayed throughout the ordeal. Her testimony was powerful and moving, describing not just the physical assault, but also the emotional impact of being humiliated in front of her fellow Marines. Her words resonated throughout the courtroom and reinforced the gravity of Rodriguez's actions. The 4 generals who had witnessed the incident also testified, providing their first-hand accounts of what they had observed. General Harrison's testimony was particularly powerful, as he described the shock and disappointment he felt upon witnessing such behavior from a Marine NCO. The collective testimony of the senior leadership left no doubt about the seriousness of the charges. The court-martial panel deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Rodriguez was sentenced to reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and a bad conduct discharge from the Marine Corps. The sentence was swift and severe, reflecting both the seriousness of his crimes and the Marine Corps' commitment to maintaining discipline and respect. The aftermath of the case had far-reaching implications for the Marine Corps. New training programs were implemented to address discrimination and harassment, reporting procedures were strengthened, and accountability measures for leaders were enhanced. The incident became a catalyst for broader reforms that improved the military experience for all Marines, regardless of gender or background. Sarah's career continued to flourish in the months and years following the incident. Her handling of the situation, combined with her already exemplary record, led to accelerated promotion opportunities and increased recognition within the Marine Corps. She became a role model for other women in the military and a sought-after speaker on topics related to leadership and professionalism. The promotion ceremony held 18 months after the incident was particularly meaningful. Sarah was promoted to major in a ceremony attended by General Harrison and several other senior leaders. In his remarks, General Harrison specifically referenced her courage and professionalism during the mess hall incident, noting that her conduct exemplified the best traditions of the Marine Corps. The impact on the broader Marine Corps culture was significant and lasting. The incident became a turning point in how the organization approached issues of gender integration and equal opportunity. Training programs were enhanced, reporting mechanisms were improved, and leaders at all levels were held to higher standards of accountability for creating inclusive and respectful environments. For the Marines who had witnessed the incident firsthand, the lessons learned were profound and lasting. They had seen that inappropriate behavior would be met with swift and severe consequences, regardless of the perpetrator's rank or length of service. They had also seen that doing the right thing, even under pressure, would be recognized and rewarded by the organization. The 4 generals continued their careers with enhanced reputations for leadership and moral courage. Their intervention in the mess hall incident became a case study in effective leadership and was referenced in military academies and leadership schools around the world. Their actions demonstrated that true leadership sometimes requires immediate and decisive intervention when witnessing injustice. Years later, Sarah reflected on the incident and its aftermath with a mixture of pride and continued determination. The experience had been traumatic and challenging, but it had also demonstrated the power of standing up for what was right, and the importance of having leaders who were willing to support their subordinates when they faced adversity. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton continued to serve thousands of Marines each day, but the culture and atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The incident had become part of the installation's history, a reminder of both the challenges that could arise and the importance of maintaining the highest standards of conduct and professionalism. The broader military community took note of how the Marine Corps had handled the incident, and similar reforms were implemented across all branches of the armed forces. The case became a landmark example of how military organizations could address discrimination and harassment while maintaining discipline and effectiveness. Rodriguez, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild his life after his discharge from the Marine Corps. The bad conduct discharge severely limited his employment opportunities and served as a permanent reminder of his poor choices. His fall from respected NCO to civilian pariah was swift and complete, serving as a cautionary tale for others who might consider similar behavior. The incident also sparked important conversations about masculinity, respect, and leadership within military circles. Academic researchers studied the case, policy experts referenced it in discussions about military culture, and advocates for women's rights pointed to it as an example of progress in addressing gender-based discrimination and violence. For Sarah, the incident ultimately strengthened her resolve to continue serving and to help create positive change within the military. She used her experience and growing influence to mentor other women in the service, advocate for policy improvements, and demonstrate through her own example that excellence and professionalism would always be recognized and rewarded. The legacy of that Tuesday morning in the mess hall at Camp Pendleton extended far beyond the immediate participants. It became a symbol of the ongoing evolution of the military, the importance of moral courage and leadership, and the power of standing up for what is right even in the face of adversity. The four generals who chose to salute first and ask questions later had sent a message that resonated throughout the military community and beyond, demonstrating that respect, dignity, and professionalism would always be the highest priorities in the United States Marine Corps. The story serves as a reminder that individual actions, both positive and negative, can have profound consequences that extend far beyond their immediate impact. It demonstrates the importance of moral courage, effective leadership, and the willingness to stand up for what is right regardless of the personal cost or professional risk involved.